in for our second game we previewed, and that is Alabama heading over to Athens, Georgia to take on Kirby Smart and his Bulldogs. 24-21 was the final score here. A little disappointed. It is what it is. We picked Georgia to win by 6. They could have definitely won by 6. There was a couple drives there at the end. One thing I was really surprised about, none of the offenses scored in the fourth quarter. Again, it is the year of the defense, and both of these defenses locked down in the final quarter of regulation to give their team the best chance to win. And the team that did that was Alabama. One thing I was a little surprised about was Georgia and how effective they were on the ground. Yeah, I didn't think they were going to be able to get 227 yards like they did. They actually averaged better on the ground than through the air. That was another big eyebrow raiser. Gunnar Stockton, I mean, his stock has been rising since that Tennessee game and the way he exploited that secondary. But when we also think about the Volunteers in that game, they had a lot of injuries, key players not playing in the DB positions. So when you come up against Alabama, who is a top 5 pass defense, that was one of the things we mentioned going into this. You're going to have a bad time. But also, you don't really need many yards to beat the Crimson Tide. Tommy Castellanos had 152 yards for Florida State in that massive win in week 1 against the Tide. And then we also saw the average not be met. Was what, 276.5 yards per game Georgia was going into this matchup with for their pass offense. They ended up only getting 130. Gunnar Stockton went 13 for 20. Again, handed the ball quite a bit off. And the player that I thought was going to have a good night, Nate Frazier, ended up with a fumble, unfortunately. It was actually Chauncey Bowens, who had 119 yards, a touchdown. I think that was the last touchdown Georgia actually scored. It was actually the only touchdown there in the second half. That's how good these defenses locked in and adjusted after halftime. Missed field goal, which I think was blocked for Alabama. And then a couple of drives for Georgia, ending off in Alabama territory with no points. So not very efficient in finishing things off and kind of getting back ahead or really giving themselves any kind of lead, which they didn't do at all in this game, if I'm not mistaken. I know we didn't watch this one. The watch-along game we did was the Oregon-Penn State game, but we were pretty much in tune with all of the scores that was happening there in Athens. But a great game for Ty Simpson. He went 24 for 38. He almost hit a home run himself, and that was this pitcher right here to Ryan Williams. We almost had that same kind of back and forth possibilities of happening where Alabama was going to just be prolific in their first set of drives and getting points. Last year, I think it was like the first 3 drives Alabama scored a touchdown on. This time around, it wasn't as perfect, but they were rolling. Going into halftime with basically all the points that they had to end the game with, which was 24. But it was really just the defense coasting off of that lead, holding on as best they could. And the best they did was good enough. Again, Ty Simpson, 276 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. And then the ground attack. We talked about that being a big question. Can Alabama run the ball? Well, they kind of did. 117 yards on the ground. Jam Miller in his debut for the 2025 season. 16 carries for 46 yards. You can't really ask much more of a player kind of knocking off rust there. It was a little bit below their current average per game, which they're 87th in the country. It's going to be a little bit less now after this. They were averaging 123.7. They were under that, and they still somehow won this game. That is just, again, crazy to see. You would expect Georgia in the offseason, we were talking about they need to get back to running the ball effectively. They did that in this game, and it still wasn't good enough. The quarterback play just didn't come in clutch enough like it did there in Knoxville. The defenses, again, had a great night. One thing I saw, kind of similar to the LSU game, not a lot of pressure on Ty Simpson. He only got sacked one time. And that was kind of an interesting thing to look at. It was like, okay, what am I missing? Was Georgia's front end as bad as I think it was? And it looks like it was. You got to put pressure on the quarterback. That was also something that we saw in that Florida State game that didn't allow Simpson to kind of get things going in general. And then when you also allow him to hit his favorite targets as well, bad things are going to happen for your team. But ultimately, Alabama got the job done. The defense, they played excellent. Even though they gave up the one touchdown there in the second half, it was more than good enough. And they got another win on the road. It was their first, it was Georgia's first loss at home since 2019, which is, that's a pretty impressive streak. If I'm not mistaken, going into this season, that was the longest home streak at the moment. That has now been crushed. Kirby Smart goes to 1-7 against Alabama. 0-2 against Kalen DeBoer. It's just some interesting stuff to look at. We'll see if these two teams meet up again. It's really going to depend on that Texas game later on in the season for Georgia, who they also have at home. Hopefully they don't drop 2, which then puts them there in most likely in the first round, and then watching the SEC championship game at home. But Alabama now puts them properly in that driver's seat. It looks like they're kind of adjusting since that Florida State loss. And I would say even if they played Florida State, let's say again, most likely they would beat the Seminoles by multiple possessions. I just think it was like week 1 jitters and just not being prepared. Also in that game, they didn't have guys in this game that they would have had, like Tim Keenum III, if I'm not mistaken. He wasn't fully healthy. Jam Miller wasn't in the backfield at all. They have been struggling in finding, some kind of vocal point there on the ground up until this game. And it was a shared committee, and it got the job done. That's all they kind of needed to do, is just grind out this really close win. A little bit different from last year. The shootout didn't happen. Like I said, this could have been a touchdown. Georgia could have also had a touchdown to a freshman that did the same thing that Ryan Williams did here in this picture. But ultimately, again, Alabama gets the dub. They're 1-0 in the SEC. Georgia falls to 1-1. They got to make sure they play close to perfect football there in conference for the rest of the year. As we zoom out.